This is a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online, the online resource for all construction professionals that's available 24/7. Now, please don't forget to subscribe at the place you usually get your podcasts so as not to miss a thing in this second series, as well, of course, as visiting our YouTube channel. Hello again and welcome to another podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. This is the first episode of Series 2 and, as usual, Barney, my red Labrador, is here to contribute his expertise to the proceedings. I hope that you enjoyed the summer. For some, I know it's not over yet. But for those for which long summer nights and tequila sunrises are just a fading memory, I hope you're enjoying getting back to work. To those about to start a new course, training or apprenticeship, Barney and me, or is it Barney and I, wish you all the very best. You've made an excellent choice to join the construction industry. The good news is, if you're about to start QS training, is that there's a high demand for quantity surveyors in the UK, with companies struggling to fill vacancies, as will be discussed later. If you're lucky enough to be starting a degree or training that offers specialisms in digitalisation or in green construction, the future looks very bright indeed. I hear on the grapevine that the first year student numbers are through the roof. A 2024 survey by World Economics Forum highlighted a general shortage of skilled people in digitalisation or green construction, as well as finding recent graduates unequipped with the right digital skills. And this is one of the main blockers to wider adoption of these emerging areas. In this first podcast of Season 2, we'll have a look at: what does a Labour government mean for construction? The skills gap in digitalisation and carbon assessment, and letters of intent and the new public procurement rules. So, we'll start with a look at: what does a Labour government mean for construction? The promises made in the election manifestos are barely dry, but already doubts are being voiced over pre-election claims. Recently, Chancellor Rachel Reeves reaffirmed the government's commitment to build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years. Now, since the majority of new homes are built by private property developers who control the supply and the quality to maximise their returns, it's difficult to see how Labour will achieve this ambitious build figures. Added to this, the skills shortage remains acute and will not be solved overnight. It's all very well saying an army of town planners will be recruited, but this takes time. Typically, they need to have an accredited degree or postgraduate qualification, completed at least 2 years' experience in town planning, and gained professional body membership. Of course, planning officers could be taken out of the equation with the local authorities mandated to meet targets. What a scary thought that is. One particularly interesting development is the potential return of the Private Finance Initiative. Episode 10 of Series 1 discussed the fact that many of the Private Finance Initiative, or PFI deals, struck in the 1990s were coming to an end. As a concept, you either loved or hated the PFI. This is where the private sector designed, financed and ran infrastructure projects such as schools, hospitals and prisons for a 20 to 25 year period in return for an annual unitary charge. After much criticism, especially from the trades unions, the PFI was finally buried as a public sector option in 2018. Or was it? Well, just when you thought it was safe to come from under the duvet, could a form of PFI going to make a comeback? In her statement in July, the Chancellor announced she is planning to bring in, and I quote, a very large number of private equity fund operators. Surely they wouldn't dare, would they? Watch this space. Speculation is such that in some newspapers in Scotland, where the PFI was particularly hated, have already got their retaliation in first by running stories highlighting some of the previous PFI projects under the heading Biggest PFI Disasters. And now moving on to the skills gap. Apart from the shortage of skilled craftsmen and women, there are currently two other areas where there are huge skills gap, as mentioned earlier, and these are hindering the wider adoption of emerging areas. They are in digital construction and carbon assessment. Now, if there's one topic that demonstrates the huge divide in the 200,000 odd contracting entities in UK construction, it's the introduction of digitalisation. The RICS, bless their cotton socks, recommends mandating data-driven processes and systems for projects and built assets, and continues to communicate in a way that really fails to engage with the attention of its members. I looked up the definition of mandating. It's requiring commanding. Good luck with that. Remember BIM? As they say in Scotland, aye, right. For those who just do not know how to start their digital journey, the CIOB recently issued an Artificial Intelligence Playbook, which is free to download. The playbook contains a very useful 12-step strategy to implementing AI within an organisation and goes a long way to demystifying the topic and is to be highly recommended. For sure, there needs to be investment in skills, and at university level, the consideration of topics like carbon assessment needs to be introduced alongside NRM 1, 2 and 3 measurement. And yet many universities continue to include subjects such as materials, how to make Portland cement, or how to spot dry rot in woodworm. It will be interesting to see the RICS proposals on how to modernise course structures when published in November. I'll certainly be carrying out a detailed analysis of the proposals when they become available. The problem is, of course, finding and paying the specialist teachers as higher education grapples with its own funding crisis. Other blockers of new techniques include cost and effort of adoption, along with no clear demand from clients or stakeholders, as well as difficulty in realising any benefit. So, first question, what is carbon assessment? The amount of carbon in a building is measured and reported in kilograms or tonnes, and is classified in two types, embodied and operational. Embodied means all the CO2 emitted in producing materials. It's estimated from the energy used to extract and transport raw materials, as well as emissions from the manufacturing processes. It includes all the emissions from construction materials, the building process, all the fixtures and fittings inside, as well as deconstructing and disposing of the building at the end of its life cycle. Operational carbon, on the other hand, includes all the emissions associated with running a building, for example heating and lighting, and is dependent upon the number of people using it. Second question, why is it important? Overall, construction is responsible for between 35 and 40% of total UK emissions, and this is set to double by 2050, if not checked. At a time when climate change is at the top of the political agenda, construction has been set ambitious targets to reduce its emissions, and currently we are falling short. Third question, what's the solution? At the design stage, the amount of embedded carbon can be estimated in the same way that a quantity surveyor currently produces estimate and life cycle cost studies. It can be used to compare the environmental impact of different building materials, designs, and construction processes. It can help to identify elements which are carbon intensive and promote alternative options which reduce the amount of CO2 released. It can be used to design buildings that reduce CO2 emissions. Final question, how is measurement done? The basic principle of calculating embodied carbon is to multiply the estimated quantity of each material or product by a carbon factor, usually measured in terms of kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square metre. This carbon factor estimate is based on a material or product's life cycle stages. CO2 equivalent values are derived by converting different greenhouse gases to a single number using their global warming potential. Sounds easy? Well, surprise, surprise, it's not. Currently, 5 different assessments would probably result in 5 different answers, as there's no consistent application or methodology on how to measure carbon, as well as a lack of available consistent data. In October 2023, the BCIS launched the Built Environment Carbon Database, similar in a way to the BCIS standard form of cost analysis used for cost planning. The database is free and open access, but the BCIS admit it's far from perfect, and importantly, it is not an assessment tool. Have a look at it. It's open access, all you need to do is register, and there are lots of video tutorials to help you understand the process. The recently updated Whole Life Carbon Assessment for the Built Environment Standard by the OICS provides consistent methodology, but it is complex, and the development of additional resources and training to make it more accessible to professionals would certainly be welcomed. On the other hand, if you or your client is prepared to pay for the assessment, there are several companies and software packages that will do the calculations for you. The International Cost Measurement Standards, or the ICMS, are designed to integrate the measurement, recording, analysis, presentation, and comparison of life cycle costs and carbon emissions of built assets. But I wonder how many organisations actually are aware of its existence, let alone use it. It's difficult enough trying to move the industry over from SMM7 to NRM2. Once again, have a look at the International Cost Measurement Standards. It's open access and available as a free download. Talking of video tutorials, a voiceover tutorial is being prepared for Duncan Cartlidge Online, reviewing measuring embodied carbon, and should be available shortly. I feel that the assessing of embodied carbon in construction is something that cannot be swept under the carpet, as currently we are falling well below the targets that we have been set. And now for something totally different. Letters of intent. Letters of intent, or letters of comfort, have long been regarded as a can of worms. Letters of intent are interim, non-binding agreements under which works can commence while negotiations of the principal contract conditions are being concluded, and while the principal contract itself is being drawn up and compiled, ready for execution. Take, for example, the case of a 2-stage tender. The winner of the first stage could be issued with a letter of intent to commence the groundworks prior to the finalisation of the second stage to get the ball rolling and advance the completion date. Letters of intent may also be used to enable a supplier or contractor to pre-order materials or set up their site establishment. They are often drafted on the basis that, if agreement is not reached on the main or second stage contract, the client will reimburse the supplier for their reasonably incurred expenses. However, there are risks, as they often put the client in a weak position vis-à-vis the conclusion of negotiations, as the supplier may think they have the client over a barrel during Stage 2 negotiations. It is common to find that works have proceeded under a letter of intent beyond the original intentions and far beyond the abilities of the letter of intent to manage the risk and capture the intentions of the parties. I have used letters of intent successfully myself, but for them to work, they do rely on trust and transparency. Two things we have in spades in construction. If a dispute does arise before the formal contract has been signed, this can and has led to huge expenditure in legal costs, trying to resolve the fundamental uncertainty as to the applicable terms. While the main contract remains unsigned, the employer is potentially liable to the contractor on a quantum merit basis, in addition to a reasonable allowance for profit. If you are responsible for proposing a letter of intent, which exposes your client to unexpected risks, the client may look to you for compensation in the event of a dispute. Therefore, unless you are legally qualified with the necessary professional indemnity insurance to cover the provision of legal advice, it's wise to advise a client to obtain separate legal advice for drafting the letter. And finally, Barney has reminded me that the new Public Procurement Act comes into force in October. The new rules promise to greatly simplify the old European single market model and introduce one streamlined set of regulations covering the public and the utility sectors, in place of the existing 4 sets of regulations, and in addition easier access to small and medium-sized enterprises. The new regime will not be restricted to UK suppliers, however. Suppliers from countries with which the UK has an existing trade agreement will also have access under the new Act. Award and tendering procedures have been reduced down to 3: the open procedure, which largely remains unchanged, the new competitive flexible procedure, and direct award. There is to be a central digital platform where suppliers will only need to register their details once. The proof will be in the pudding, of course, but as someone who unsuccessfully tried to break into the European public procurement market in the late 1990s, only to find it the largest closed shop in Europe, it looks on the face of it a move in the right direction. Well, that's all for this episode. I hope that you found it interesting. In the coming months, it will be fascinating to see whether Labour can deliver on its promises. In the next podcast, we're going to have a look at, amongst other things, patent and latent defects. This has been a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe. And from Barney and me, until next time, take care.